Since the market is flat, let's talk about some macro themes now. In the month gone by, the auto sales numbers have picked up. So after declining for 2 months in a row, the November car sales rose about 9.5%. R.C. Bhargava, the chairman of Maruti Suzuki, joins us now to talk about that. Mr. Bhargava, good morning and thanks for joining us. You know, the festive season was quite lukewarm for the entire sector, but then in November we saw a bit of a pickup. How are you assessing the situation in the first part of the new year?
You know, the festive season certainly was a disappointment. But November picked up. Now, whether this is going to be maintained in the subsequent months or this was just an aberration for a month is very difficult to say yet. But overall, if you look at the picture for the industry for the whole year, it's still not so bright. Maruti itself, of course, cannot complain. We are still in double-digit growth. But if you exclude Maruti, the rest of the industry still, till the end of November, has been in negative territory. So I think we still need to see some more time before we can be make a judgment as to whether things have started to improve or not.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Bhargava. Thank you very much for joining. Is that right, that if you excluded Maruti, the industry was still contracting in November?
Not in November itself, but from April till November, industry has contracted.
Now, we are just trying to gauge whether there is an inflection point here or at least a U-turn, even if not a very sharp one. Would you have that confidence? The November numbers, as you pointed out, nearly 20% higher year on year. You already know perhaps the first 15 days of December. Are you getting a sense that the worst is over for industry and Maruti?
No, I won't make a judgment yet till I see the figures finally of what happens in December and perhaps January, because wholesale figures are not necessarily an indication of what is happening in the market. 1 month's wholesale figures can be high and what is reported is always the wholesale figures, not the retail figures. And therefore, unless you look at wholesale figures for at least a quarter, you can't be very sure as to whether there is a sustained growth movement or not.
The one thing that we've noticed amongst all the companies, Mr. Bhargava, is the fact that exports has been driving the overall sales for the past couple of months. Do you think this export piece will continue to salvage the growth for the sector and domestic sales will, be sort of lukewarm for a while?
No, exports have certainly increased at a much higher percentage than what it was last year. But if you look at the total volume of exports, it's still a small part of the total production and sales of the automobile industry. So I'm not sure if one could legitimately say that exports are driving the growth of the industry. Because, for example, in Maruti's case, the exports this year compared to last year will be higher maybe by 10,000 vehicles. That's not such a large number when you're talking of 1.3 million of total production.
Okay. But is that market itself secure? Because we hear of so much of downturn stories. So is even that pace of growth of that small element in your basket secure, or is it dibbly-dobbly?
This year certainly has turned out better. I think the export markets are looking up a little bit. But one can never be very sure of predicting the export markets on a long-term basis, because some country or the other sometimes changes some of its rules and regulations, and immediately that has an impact on sales of vehicles. This year, for example, we have been lucky. Sri Lanka lowered its import duties, and the sale in Sri Lanka from a few hundred cars has gone up to 2,000 cars a month. So the difference is so large because of some of these regulatory changes that it becomes a little bit hard to say what's going to happen in the future.
How will you assess the fall in energy prices, Mr. Bhargava? Does it mean more people will drive? Or in running any company, since you're so much a manufacturing man, does it make the operational cost much lower?
It makes an impact on the operational cost, but more important, I think this falling commodity prices, including crude, because everything has softened in this last few months.
Sure.
It reduces our costs of production, but more importantly, the users' costs of maintaining and operating a car get reduced. And that actually gives a greater benefit to us than the reduction in our own costs, because the sale of cars go up when the customer finds that it's not as expensive to maintain a car as he thought it would be.
The analyst fraternity is keenly watching out for the new launches from Maruti stable, specifically the SX crossover and the XA Alpha. Can you just give us a timeline in terms of when these new launches are expected, and also how is the new Ciaz doing in terms of demand, etc.?
The Ciaz demand has been good. It was slightly impacted because of the fact that we had to get a few of the cars coming back to us to check for the clutch problem. But overall, it's as much as we thought it would be. It's doing very well. And as far as other models are concerned, we never really can disclose in advance the date of its launch. But all I can say is the crossover would come in 2015, certainly in the first half of 2015.
Okay. Mr. Bhargava, how much does the yen add to your margins? Well, it's quite a gain you must have had, what, 20% almost?
You know, our capacity of Manesar and Gurgaon is something close to 1.5 million cars. And so far this year, we are, I think, going to be running at something nearing 1.3. So anything which adds to volume and therefore better utilization of capacity will always add to margins, because the depreciation and fixed costs are already accounted for in the smaller volume.
So I don't know if maybe I wasn't audible enough. I meant the depreciation of the currency, the yen.
Oh, the depreciation, of course, is a positive factor, except if the dollar keeps going up, because the rupee depreciation, yen rate is actually a cross rate between the yen and the dollar and the rupee. So while the depreciation of the yen helps us, the appreciation of the dollar does not. But overall, it's been an advantage, and I think our margins have improved in the last quarters because of the fact that the yen has become cheaper.
Actually, some analysts were forecasting that because of because of the depreciation in the yen, the margins could go up to about 14% or so in the next 1.5 years from the 12.5% currently. Is that a reasonable expectation?
I wouldn't predict margins for a longer term, because there are too many uncertainties associated with margins. It relates to commodity costs, it relates to inflation, and of course on currency. Who can predict a currency's movement over the next year or 2 years?
All right, Mr. Bhargava, we'll leave it at that. We've run out of time, but we would have loved to chat some more about a lot of other issues with respect to Maruti. But you have a great weekend. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.